What happens when your prime minister becomes a punchline on American television? Not a hostile network, not a right-wing firebrand, but CNN. Yes, that's CNN.
These numbers are absolutely atrocious. I mean, you never see numbers like this in the United States of Americans. Britons who like Keir Starmer, look at this. Overall, it's just 1 in 5. It's just 1 in 5.
This week, a segment aired in the United States that stunned many British viewers. American anchors openly expressed disbelief at the approval ratings of Keir Starmer, with one commentator describing the numbers as atrocious. The figure being discussed? Roughly 1 in 5 Britons expressing approval. Around 20%. Let that sink in.
These numbers are absolutely atrocious. I mean, you never see numbers like this in the United States of Americans. Britons who like Keir Starmer, look at this. Overall, it's just 1 in 5. It's just 1 in 5. It's 20%. His own party, Labour, he's just at 52% there. I've even seen numbers with satisfaction of him in the teens. This is actually higher than the lowest number. We're talking just about 20%. You know, we always talk about Donald Trump being unpopular in this country, but Donald Trump looks downright like Abraham Lincoln compared to Keir Starmer's numbers at this point.
Well, translate this into American then.
Okay, let's translate this into American. Okay, I think of presidents, I think of leaders of this country who had low approval ratings, and I think of Richard Nixon. Okay, popularity ratings in their own country. In 1974, Richard Nixon, just before he was forced to resign, 24%. But look at Starmer. He's actually lower. He's lower at 20%. He is polling worse now than Richard Nixon was with Americans before he was forced to resign. And I will note within their own party, they're both at about 50% popularity ratings. That, of course, is a very dangerous number because it's one thing if you don't have the support of the overall electorate, but when you don't even have the real support of your own party, those are the types of numbers that you can say adios amigos, goodbye, see you later.
We know what this typically means here in the United States, low numbers like this. What have numbers this low, if there have ever been numbers this low, mean for people in power in the United Kingdom?
Yeah, okay, so I went back through the history books, looked back through all the stats, all the old British polls that I can find. Okay, let's take a look at UK PMs with ratings as bad as Starmer's. Look at this. All lost or resigned before their next election. So nobody who has had numbers as bad as Keir Starmer has ever survived numbers this bad. Just like Richard Nixon didn't survive numbers this bad back in 1974.
So then what are the prediction markets saying about what could happen to Starmer?
Okay, so what are the prediction markets saying what happened to Keir Starmer? Take a look here. Chance Starmer is out of power by the end of August. Already 59% chance that Keir Starmer is out of power by the end of August. If there was a market later on, I bet this number would climb even higher. But at this point, Keir Starmer has a major size political problem, and I don't think the news of today will help him much.
In politics, approval ratings fluctuate, governments dip, leaders recover, but 20% is not a dip, it's a warning flare. And what made this moment different wasn't just the number, it was the comparison. On air, the host drew parallels to former US President Richard Nixon, who, just before resigning in 1974, saw approval ratings fall to 24%. The implication was stark. Starmer's numbers, they argued, were even lower. Now let's pause here. Approval ratings are snapshots, not verdicts. Polling methodologies differ between countries. Context matters. Timing matters. But perception is everything. And when American broadcasters begin comparing Britain's Prime Minister to leaders in their final days in office, it signals something deeper than a bad week. It signals international scrutiny, because politics no longer stops at national borders. A prime minister's standing at home affects credibility abroad. And Starmer has already been in US headlines recently, particularly following reports that the UK would not automatically grant the use of British military bases in potential future conflicts without legal consideration. That decision was framed by some in America as hesitation, by others as caution. But either way, it added to a narrative forming overseas. Is Britain drifting from its closest ally? Now, critics argue this is exaggerated. The UK-US relationship is layered, institutional, and long-standing. Governments change, alliances endure. But politics isn't just about treaties. It's about tone. And when that tone shifts, commentators take notice. The CNN segment didn't just analyze numbers. It translated them into American political language. If this were the United States, one host suggested, numbers like this would signal serious danger. That comparison lands heavily, because in the US, low approval ratings often trigger internal party challenges, legislative gridlock, and media frenzy. In the UK, leadership challenges follow different rules. But the principle remains. When your own party's support softens, danger increases. Some polling suggests Starmer's approval among Labour voters remains above water. Other surveys paint a murkier picture. But here's the broader issue. The Prime Minister entered office promising stability, professionalism, competence, a break from chaos. If public satisfaction drops to levels typically associated with crisis, the promise feels strained. And that's where this story stops being about CNN. It becomes about momentum, because international mockery doesn't create domestic weakness. It amplifies it. And amplification matters in an election cycle. The opposition watches, party factions watch, foreign governments watch, markets watch. A prime minister doesn't need universal popularity, but sustained unpopularity becomes oxygen for rivals. Now here's the question that truly matters. Is this a temporary slump or the beginning of a structural problem? Because British political history tells us something uncomfortable. Leaders who fall into the low 20s rarely bounce back easily. Confidence, once fractured, doesn't repair overnight. And when global media starts highlighting the fracture, the pressure multiplies. What do the historical comparisons actually show? Have prime ministers survived numbers this low before? And why are prediction markets suddenly placing serious odds on leadership instability? Because if the Americans are watching closely, Westminster certainly is. We broke down the jaw-dropping moment when commentators on CNN openly mocked the approval ratings of Prime Minister Keir Starmer, comparing him to Richard Nixon just before his resignation. Now we need to ask the bigger question. How did a British Prime Minister end up polling worse than Nixon at the height of Watergate and being laughed at on American television? Because this isn't just about numbers. It's about authority. It's about credibility. It's about whether Britain is still taken seriously on the world stage. The collapse in confidence. Let's put this into perspective. When a prime minister drops to around 20% approval, or even into the teens, as some surveys suggest, you're no longer dealing with a temporary dip. You're dealing with a structural collapse in public trust. In British political history, leaders who hit these levels rarely survive intact. Low approval ratings in the UK tend to trigger cabinet instability, backbench rebellion, leadership speculation, media, blood in the water, and crucially, loss of authority internationally. World leaders watch the polls, markets watch the polls, allies watch the polls. If a prime minister looks politically fragile at home, they lose leverage abroad. That's the real danger. The special relationship question. Now layer this onto foreign policy. The UK's global strength has always rested heavily on one cornerstone, the special relationship with the United States. And here's where it gets uncomfortable. When American commentators start comparing Britain's Prime Minister unfavourably to their own most scandal-ridden president, it signals something deeper. They no longer see him as politically strong. That matters enormously in NATO discussions. It matters in security coordination. It matters in diplomatic negotiations. At the recent Munich Security Conference, Starmer emphasised closer ties with Europe and NATO partners. But NATO's central pillar remains the United States. And Washington pays attention to political weakness. The Trump factor. Then there's the complication of Donald Trump. If Trump returns to power, or even remains politically dominant, any British Prime Minister will need functional working relations with him. CNN, a network frequently critical of Trump, is not exactly known for conservative sympathies, which makes their mockery even more striking. When even a left-leaning US network is openly questioning the durability of Britain's Prime Minister, it signals that the perception of weakness has crossed ideological lines. and perception in politics becomes reality very quickly. Internal party danger. But perhaps more alarming than international mockery is something else: his own party numbers. When support among your own base drops to around 50%, that's not comfort. That's danger territory. Because party discipline is built on confidence. If MPs believe the leader is electorally toxic, local elections will be disastrous. Their own seats are at risk. Then loyalty evaporates fast. History shows that British leadership challenges can move with astonishing speed once momentum shifts. And once a narrative takes hold that a prime minister is damaged goods, it becomes self-fulfilling. The May local elections. The real test. Many political observers believe the real tipping point may be the upcoming local elections. If Labour suffers heavy council losses, regional setbacks, voter turnout collapse, then the internal pressure could become overwhelming. Leadership contests in the UK don't require a general election defeat to trigger change. They require panic inside the parliamentary party. And panic begins when MPs believe the leader is dragging them down. Why the CNN moment matters. Let's be clear, foreign media criticism alone doesn't topple a prime minister. But humiliation on a global stage chips away at authority. When your approval ratings are discussed internationally, compared to Nixon framed as historically catastrophic, it reinforces the narrative that your premiership is unstable. Politics runs on momentum. Right now, the momentum is negative. The human rights lawyer. Criticism critics argue that Starmer's background as a human rights lawyer has shaped his leadership style, prioritizing legal frameworks and international norms over raw political positioning. Supporters say this demonstrates principle. Detractors say it demonstrates political naivety. Whether fair or not, the narrative has formed that he governs like a lawyer in a courtroom rather than a strategist in a political battlefield. And in volatile geopolitical times, voters often reward strength over technical correctness. The prediction markets. Add to this the growing chatter in political betting markets about his survival prospects. While prediction markets aren't guarantees, they do reflect perceived instability. When speculation about a prime minister leaving office becomes mainstream discussion, it alters behaviour inside Westminster. MPs start calculating, donors hesitate, cabinet colleagues position themselves, and rivals quietly prepare. The central question. So here's the core issue. Is this just a rough patch? Or is this the beginning of terminal decline? Because historically, leaders who fall to these approval depths rarely climb back without a dramatic policy shift, a major political victory, or a transformative external event. Absent that, the slide often continues.